Start the recording. And okay, just a second. This will look odd, but it's planned. Just let me take my video off for a second. And what I want here. Yeah. So you just graduated.
Yes, I did yesterday.
Okay, I'm not going to do the whole thing with this, but I thought it would be fun.
I think you should.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't.
Well, okay, so yeah, what was my sequence here? Yeah, so I was just wondering what are you now, having graduated? What do you have?
So I have a bachelor's degree, and my degree was in organizational communication, and my minor was in philosophy. I usually just say communication because whenever I say organizational communication, people ask me to explain it, and I'm like, it's the study of communication in organizations. And then they're like, well, that sounds really boring. And I'm like, it is.
So I guess there's two main reasons I contacted you, because part of the reason is that I'd already talked to you a few years ago, almost 4 years ago. And so both because of the changes that have taken place since then, and me too, as far as my approach to this and how well that basically went, I thought that our podcast then, I want to do it again. Overall, the reason is that I think I gave no thought to how I would put this. Normally I figure out how I want to explain this. I can give this any thought at all. So this can be the unscripted podcast. Because I was both several years ago and now, I was quite interested in understanding what I see as gender dysphoria. People have different terms for it and different ways of thinking about it, which is fine. That's currently how I think of it, and surrounding issues and so on. And I've watched a number of YouTubers and people talking about it, and I like your approach. I found it to be direct, and it would give concrete information as well as more surrounding thought. And you seemed interested in taking people's perspectives into account, more so probably than I actually am. And so all of that seemed useful and appealing. And I actually watch your channel more than probably other channels that I may, I shouldn't admit this, but other people I will invite on, I probably don't watch as much as you. So take that as you may. Just to blow up the ego.
I appreciate it.
So and so I contacted you both then and now to talk about that stuff. And because I guess one other thing I should mention is that from what I've seen, people, it's often a polarizing topic. It's often a politicized topic, as I understand it. Stuff to do with gender dysphoria,
yeah,
transgender stuff. And that's a real shame. And I'm not interested in doing that. And so what I'm interested in doing in part on this channel is talking to people and creating smaller or bigger moments, so to speak, where that is really not happening, where people are really just communicating and taking something that could be polarized and not, and taking different perspectives and trying to work it out. And so that's what I'm hoping to do.
Love it.
Your turn.
Why I'm talking to you?
Yes.
I have really, really enjoyed our conversations, and I feel like you're doing a really good job of like living up to, your pitch of your channel is to just like talk to people and not try to have necessarily a debate or try to, politicize it. So, I enjoy talking to you. Is that like too simple of an answer? But
no.
Yeah.
The only other thing which I'm curious about is when we first talked several years ago, we'd done a little bit of a trial run and so on, but even then, I mean, you still said yes. So do you remember then what?
Oh, I mean, at that time, you mean like in 2017?
Yeah, and so the reason why I think it's relevant to go back that far is because we wouldn't be talking to each other necessarily now if we hadn't first set that up. So
right. So why did I say yes in the first place? had kind of started to, for the first time, get like a sort of unsettling amount of like, I started forming like a little YouTube community. I started getting like more views than I was used to. And so I was like, I don't know, I guess I wanted to, I just thought the idea of like talking to people about this very niche thing would be really cool. And I just thought it was a, good opportunity to like talk to as many people on this platform as I can about this, because clearly I'm not the only person who's interested in it. That meaning, uh, gender and society and the complexities of all of that. So it was just, yeah, I was forming a little niche community that I was really excited about.
Okay, I may have just been thinking of something else for a second, but so the niche community was a good thing, and or you wanted to branch out of it?
Um, I don't know if I really wanted to like, I don't think I wanted to branch out of it. I think I saw it as a good thing.
So it's just it was working and you wanted to keep building it.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
right. Okay, well, I probably want to return to the question of generally what you're up to on YouTube, but it occurs to me that right now people don't actually know really why we're talking.
Yeah.
So what I'm planning to do, I'll be probably struggling for words and vocabulary throughout, because I still have not sorted out when it comes to stuff to do with gender dysphoria, with transgender things, or whether you want to say transsexual things or gender identity, whatever terms appeal to you. I have not figured out a vocabulary that I'm completely comfortable with, that feels accurate, that is as unupsetting to as many people as possible. And probably that's it. So I'm trying to balance accuracy with not being unduly offensive to people. So
What do you worry about, like, that would be offensive? What are you worried about that would be offensive that you could say in
first
terms
of
of
all, I'm
language?
not particularly concerned about offending you at all, because that doesn't
Yeah.
seem to happen, which is part of the reason we're talking. But well, just saying gender dysphoria, I thought it had been taken out of the DSM-5 or whatever the
Has
latest.
it? I mean, I know it changed at one point from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria.
And then I have my own peculiar reasons for sometimes preferring to say transsexual over transgender, which
Mhm.
I think can sound old-fashioned and weird.
Some people do think that transsexual sounds old-fashioned. I don't really see how it's, offensive though. Like, yeah, it's used less. It's used less. And I think the problem that people have with it is that it seems to, be associated with a time where, transgender people were people who had sex changes. And now that, the social understanding of what transgender means, not all people have sex changes or sexual reassignment surgery. You don't need that to be trans. So I think it's probably, my understanding around the transgender versus transsexual conversation is that it has to do with the implications of like what is required to be trans.
Which is and there'll be other things along the way. I don't want to bring it all up now. I'm just saying, if I sound like I'm trying to make a point of being more natural, because in my earlier podcasts, I feel like I did a certain amount of stammering, which was mostly me fishing around. So I'm just going to say stuff, and then you or I can improve on it if it needs work. But anyways, okay, so we've said why we're here in a very high and lofty way, but as far as why, can you give this a tiny synopsis of your story as it relates to us talking, and then we'll probably go back and go through it really carefully.
Okay, so
just like whatever interests you, like from the point of view of having a channel and talking about gender and whatnot.
Right. So I've always, felt weird about my relationship to my own gender, and I've been making YouTube videos since I was like 12 years old. I came out as trans when I was 17, and there was kind of a big community of like trans YouTubers. So I was like, oh, I'll be I'll just, make videos about trans stuff. People seem to like that. It's I've always been like sort of a self-involved person. So, I enjoyed making videos talking about myself and what I was going through with this, transitioning thing. And then I think I made a video about Jordan Peterson that got really popular because I was basically saying like, hey, I'm trans, and he was involved in controversy with like trans issues. And I was like, I'm trans and I respect him. And
I love him, I believe was the title. I'm
yeah.
trans and I love Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. But so that started getting some amount of attention. And I was still sort of like, a trans YouTuber, and that's kind of where we talked the first time. I think you saw that video, and you're very familiar with Jordan Peterson and like kind of know him.
That's a strong met and know
Yeah,
are very
yeah, but
different.
like I don't know, you're pretty closely associated. Well, I don't know. Jordan
We'll
Peterson.
come back to that.
Yes, yes. And so basically did that for like 3 or 4 years, talking about like society and culture from a trans perspective. And then I detransitioned a year ago, but I didn't actually like publicly say on YouTube I was detransitioning until last December. And now I'm still talking about gender, but from someone who, has changed their gender twice. But yeah, and my opinions have changed a little bit. And I'm also, trying to be very careful not to offend people, because this can be a very contentious situation.
It almost always seems to be, at least in public conversation. I don't know if it is an actual people talking to each other conversation. I hope. Right. And I had a thought and it went away. Every podcast so far I've done, there's a point where my mind goes blank and the thing I was just holding there disappeared.
Yeah, no worries. Apologies if that wasn't a very concise answer.
No, that was concise. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. Oh, right. And that reminds me what it was. So as far as things which could be obvious to us, but possibly not obvious to other people, you would consider, well, we both consider you to be female to male to female, meaning that, strictly speaking, biologically speaking, you're female. Then you transition to being, presenting yourself, at least I don't know how you thought of yourself, but as being male, masculine, etc. And then now, okay, so do I have any other things I want to start? Oh yeah, I just have this note here that I probably don't need to make it, but that I will probably throughout try and ask you questions from different points of view. So it could seem to someone else, I don't think it'll seem to you, like I'm pushing a particular perspective or agenda, but then I'll switch to another one and I'll switch to another one, and I'm just trying to understand things and test things and so on. So it's like it's not going to be confrontational, but it might seem probing. And yeah, that seems good. Yes. Okay. So let's go back, because I still don't, we talked for about an hour and a half 4 years ago, and I'm sure I've learned things from that. It's hard to tell what I actually learned. I've watched a bunch of your stuff and thought a bunch, so it's hard to tell what I gained from that. But I still don't actually know what you're dealing with. But that's good, because it means I'm still coming to this curious. I actually haven't done as much research for this as I thought I would, because I realized, for all intents and purposes, this is going to be an introduction to many people, to you, or even to the subject at this depth. So coming to it kind of clueless on my part is probably just as well. And now we've agreed to lots of time, so I don't need to worry about barreling along. So going back to as early as seems appropriate, what are some things that you think are distinctive in your experience that relate to this?
You mean like?
Well, okay, no, let me try it somewhere else, a different way. I'm sure that there's lots of things that people are uncomfortable about during their lives. So things they're self-conscious about, things about their appearance, things about how they talk, things about how they socialize, all sorts of things. So what became, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but essentially unbearable, because I think, or unbearable enough that you did some radical things to address it?
I think that I am an unfortunately suggestible person, and when I was 17, I even more so. And I think I somehow convinced myself that being a girl or a woman, more specifically, would just be impossible.
Okay.
But
I want to make sure that initially we go through it as much as possible from your perspective pre-transition. So when you say you were suggestible, like you didn't think you were suggestible at the time, presumably. So I don't want to, for lack of a better word, contaminate that experience with your interpretation of it now.
right.
I want to get to that later. So like, what at the time, how did things seem?
At the time, I mean, I was very, very online. I think I would be one of the people who sort of like transitioned, from like sort of a social contagion type of cause.
Okay, I'm just going to say to anyone who might be watching this who's about to leave because they don't like that,
I was
we
just
will,
about to say,
we will
like,
that's, we're not just going to push one point of view. I'm certainly not going to. So stick around, please.
yes, no, I was just about to say, just because that happened to be the reason why I transitioned, that doesn't mean that I can't just be presumptuous and assume that, like, that's why every 17-year-old female transitions.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I'm
so
thinking it's probably going to be hard to separate your interpretation of your experiences and decisions. Like, I lost my sense. It's probably going to be hard for you to separate your interpretation now of your past experiences from what it was like at the time. So I don't want to trip you up by insisting that you try to first say things from your past self's point of view, but I will try to get at it because I want to give her credit. So
yeah, yeah. So I had always really, really wanted to uh I was masculine in the way that I wanted to like be seen ever since I was, I don't know how old I was when I was in eighth grade, I was pretty like butch, and most people like read me as a boy, and I was like, oh, that, I somehow feel better when people address me as a boy. I think I would have more confidence as a boy. It makes it somehow in a way like made more sense, and that kind of I did not like that sort of like being in the back of my head didn't really leave. And so
I got a question already. So when you're saying when you're 12, which is before you had any ideas of transgender even as a
right,
concept,
no,
people
yeah,
were already mistaking you for being male. Is that right?
yeah, for a period of time,
Frequently?
because I had really short hair and I would wear boys clothes.
Okay,
Like I
so were you were wanting that? Was that the plan, or is it just kind of how it worked out?
It's just kind of how it worked out.
Okay.
I liked having I had a very masculine way of expressing myself, I guess. I was not like other girls, if you want to use that heinous phrase. But yeah, it just kind of started happening. I wasn't trying to, I wasn't, thinking like I'm gonna transition, because I didn't know anything about like actually what being transgender was at that time.
Okay. And well, okay, we'll keep going for now. We'll see if I have anything else there. But that's interesting. See, that's something I didn't know, and that's interesting already potentially.
Yeah, no, no, no. It wasn't something that just sort of, it was not something that was like suddenly, when I'm 17, I get the crazy idea that I'm like, that I'm trans and that I want to be a boy. Like I'd always like, I was, saying stuff about wanting to be a boy, at like 4, 5, 6 years old. So it's not something that was, new. It's always been something that's kind of been in the back of my head. And that kind of, that sort of perfectly aligned with the narrative of the transgender experience, which is that this is something that, it's a discomfort that is like goes back to your early childhood. But what I never had was like physical dysphoria or any type of body dysmorphia.
Yeah, so that is remarkable to me. I guess it may not be as uncommon as I think. It seems to me I've read things saying that it's actually not particularly uncommon. Also, for gay kids, I think that often that they have that. But I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I'd dress up. We'd play. I was homeschooled, which meant I got to do a lot of free fun things at home, and we'd dress up, and I would often wear dresses, sometimes on my head. I guess there'd be more skirts and tutus. The dress wouldn't really work on your head, but it didn't have, it didn't seem to have any lasting effect, or didn't have any real substance to it. I did sometimes feel more connected to female characters in stories, but not a lot. But
yeah,
so
that was another thing. That was another thing for me, like the feeling, when I was very young, feeling more of a connection to male characters. Yeah, not really. That never really happened with female characters. So I guess I sort of, in a very like vague sense, not vague, but like difficult to describe, annoyingly not concrete way, I saw myself as a boy, but it was not connected to my physical body at all.
Okay. Is there anything else you can think of saying about that, or do you want to move forward in time?
I feel like that adequately sums it up.
Okay. So then, this is kind of not possibly shirking my responsibility as an interviewer, but so then what was the next notable time that you think would be relevant?
From what point?
Started when we were 12, so like going forward from there.
Okay. But yeah, like I said, I was very online, and spent most of my time just looking at stuff on the internet.
This is even at 12?
Yeah. 13, 14.
Okay. And you had a YouTube channel then too, you said, right? Yeah. This is a side note, but I know there are a lot of videos you put out that you have since disappeared. Are they private, or are they gone, or just
most of them are private. Okay, so I don't really like to delete videos because I really enjoy documenting things and going back and watching them for myself. But
you don't find that disturbing? I find it disturbing watching these. It's really hard. Like, I'm gonna have to go through this to give it timestamps because it's gonna go on forever. So I want to make it easy for people to cut to their favorite parts. And I'm gonna have to watch me for hours, and it's gonna be rough. So you don't find that particularly?
Oh, I mean, I sometimes do.
Like, most people seem to not like hearing themselves, seeing themselves. It's alarming to how different they are. Their voice always sounds awful to them, almost always.
Yeah, I mean, I get that a little bit, but I think I've gotten used to it.
I guess you've had time to build up a tolerance.
Yeah, but sometimes I go back and edit my videos, and I like just phrase something in a way that like makes no sense. But yeah, I'm still very self-critical of myself when I watch myself, but it's not like painful.
It's analytical more than emotional, but sounds of it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well, I have to work on that. Mine, I don't, especially when I'm happy. I don't like the way I look when I'm happy, which doesn't go well with a informal podcast. But anyways, okay, so yeah, right. So you're making a bunch of videos, and you say you're online quite a bit. Okay.
So I started hearing about like, those, made up gender identities, which again sounds offensive, but like they are made up, I mean, you could argue that male and female are made up, but these are just recently made up, gender identities, and like different, like gender queer, agender, gender fluid, bi, demigirl, you
Mhm.
know, pandemic romantic, like all that kind of, you know what I mean? That moment
Yeah.
in like 2016, 2015. And I was like probably like, no, I was probably 14 or 15 at the time. So this was, yeah, when that first kind of started coming up. And I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm genderqueer. And I was like kind of like saying that I was non-binary because I was like, I don't feel comfortable being a girl, and neither do these people. And I still was like, yeah, the idea of transitioning to male was still like pretty extreme to me, not really something that I was giving that much serious thought to. Um, I didn't start like considering being a trans man until I was like later in high school, when I was like 16, 17. And then I kind of, you know, it got to a point where I was thinking about it every single day, like, you know, am I trans? Am I not trans? Uh, and so I decided to just kind of like just kind of go for it. I told everyone like, call me Oliver, call me this name, call me he, him. And I just want to, you know, see if I am this, see if this clicks. It was something that I was actually quite tentative about at first. I was like, if you, I don't know if I'm getting surgery, I don't know if I'm going to go on hormones, but I think I need to try this. But also in my head, I was like, it would be so embarrassing if I like went back.
Mhm.
So I have to stick to it. I have to stick to my guns because people aren't taking me seriously. Um,
Um, I'm curious about when you're asking people to do that, to make those adjustments, how awkward is that for you?
it's really awkward. I mean, I've had to do it recently, like with my coworkers,
Mhm.
because they met me as Ali. Some of them didn't know I was trans in the first place, and you know, I have to sort of do it again.
But even
Some most
even
people just
the
what?
first time, I'm thinking too, like just I don't want to me, I generally I have trouble actually in many cases in being too agreeable and not wanting to impose on people. Doesn't mean I don't, but it means that if I'm aware of it, I'm uncomfortable with it often. And I suspect you are too. So I'm trying to imagine asking, and it's something which in the more public political battley sorts of things is not addressed at all, as far as I know, and particularly by if I was going to put it in horribly black and white terms, if there's a pro-trans and anti-trans side, like the pro-trans side, you wouldn't, I haven't heard say, yeah, we're sorry about this weird, awkward thing we're asking for, but could you do it for me?
Mhm.
Um, and it's hard if you're trying to, well, yeah, anyway. So, but I don't think, so I'm just wondering for you whether there was actually.
No, yeah, I found it terribly uncomfortable and very like invasive to, I mean, depending on who it was, really, depending on how long they knew me before, like my parents or like my best friend since I was 8, like it feels very invasive to their psyche.
Mhm.
You know, like, hey, can you do me a favor and change your perception of me? Because that's really what you have to do first to effectively change your language. You know, until your perception of the person changes from male to female, that takes a long time. You're gonna slip up a lot.
Mhm.
And it's like I would always, when people would slip up, I, you know, would like feel mostly angry at myself for not like convincing them enough
Mm.
that like I know I'm a guy. No, I'm a guy. I wouldn't really get mad at the person. And that was a complicated sort of set of emotions because I'm like, it's like, oh, they hurt me. What they said hurt me. So that, you know, immediately makes one want to get mad at the person. But then I think I took it on myself and was like, oh, I'm not convincing them enough. I need to go on testosterone and, you know, cut my breasts off to show them that I mean business and that I am a boy.
Mhm.
Um, and even when people's perceptions, you know, did eventually change after like my parents' perception never did because they're my parents, but like um, when people did, you know, stop calling me she, um, it it was anticlimactic, I guess.
Okay. Right. Okay. I forgot what I was going to say, so we'll keep going. Well, I guess you kind of did just outline your biography from this point of view already. Is there anything else? Well, no, I'm wrong about that. Okay. So, you say you're finding out more about online, more about this, and then you're asking people to make the changes, but at this point you've done nothing medical whatsoever.
Yes.
Okay, so from carrying on, and this is getting really close to when I first heard of you, because it was, correct me for, it was within a year, I think, wasn't it? I think it was less than a year when you put out your Jordan Peterson video. It seems to me it was after that you put out a 1 year on T video.
Right. Yeah. So I was less than a year on T when we first talked.
Which,
because I started my medical transition, I guess, by going on testosterone is when, you start physically changing your body. Right after high school, like the summer between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college. So, because, I was tired of being called she and people and like not convincing people enough that like I was in fact a guy in a very real sense. So I think the reason why I went on testosterone as soon as I could, because again, in the very beginning, I was kind of like, I was still unsure if I wanted to, go on testosterone. I want to know what it feels like to, be trans, I guess, for a while before I do that. But it felt like I couldn't effectively be trans without, going on testosterone. So
okay,
even though,
what do you mean by effectively trans? Because that sounds like you're making it separate.
like people wouldn't take me seriously.
Okay, so it's not a matter of, how you come across to people in just, at the convenience store. It's how people who knew you would see you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, I think. Not that I want to inject too much opinion in this, but it sounds like that consideration, which makes a lot of sense, of wanting to come across as serious or wanting people to appreciate the what you're experiencing, essentially, that there's an element of proof.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's the whole extra factor that complicates the process of trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And then, later on when I had, completed every medical step that I wanted to complete, at this point being like 22 years old, I'm like, man, it really wasn't worth it. I didn't have to do this. That kind of skips ahead a little bit, because I was trans for 4 years. I was on testosterone for 3.5 years. But it took me going through all of the, not all of them, but, the most common steps of a female to male transition for me to realize that I actually didn't have to, that I could have worked through the dysphoria or whatever it was. And I put quotes around dysphoria because I don't even necessarily think that that's accurate of me to say, because it wasn't a physical problem. It wasn't, it wasn't dysmorphic at all.
Right. Now, I want to spend a bit of time with that, because I guess it was, I did an interesting thing as part of my research. I was reading the comments of your last 3 videos, because I thought there might be something interesting that would come up there that we could address. And
what are my last 3 videos? The Q&A,
right, the Q&A, the one you did with Jason, and the one maybe it was 4 videos then, and the one about medical gatekeeping, as you called it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I probably looked at the detransition announcement as well. I'm not sure.
Okay.
And now I don't know that I learned a lot from it, but one thing I want to spend time on is someone was saying that, oh dear, where am I going again? This happens more than I expect, where I forget where I was headed with something. What were we talking about a second ago? You're talking about, what were you talking about a second ago?
I was talking about the having to go through medical transition to realize I didn't need to.
Right. Oh, okay, good. I remember what I was going to say. Yeah, you had said that in talking to your therapist, psychiatrist, whoever it was, that you thought you misrepresented to some degree your dysphoria in order to get testosterone. Is that right? Or this is a comment someone had said about what you'd said, so it could be screwy. But does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so is,
Again, I think that was an effort for me to be taken seriously.
okay. Now this is a bit out of sync, but it's just because I'll lose it if I don't think of it now, or out of place, I should say, is that someone or a few people who I think misinterpreted the tone of your medical gatekeeping episode as complaining about how it should be stricter, a stricter route to get to medical transition, to make sure that the person knows what they're doing and that it's, as far as they can tell, the best thing. And they're saying, but you also admitted to gaming the system, so maybe that the problem isn't the system.
Maybe
Now
that maybe the problem is, is me and I should take responsibility for it.
Right, but I didn't interpret it that way.
Relating it.
When I watched, I interpreted you were saying two things at once, which is that it was, you thought, too easy, like you should have had to go through multiple more sessions or whatever, and also taking responsibility for doing that. That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say about that?
I mean, it's really difficult. Like, I don't know.
I'm not looking for like a big spiel about the medical gatekeeping issue generally. I just want to clarify that balance that I thought you were trying to maintain and see whether I
Oh yeah, no, yeah, what you described is accurate. I was trying to I'm trying to have a balance between like taking responsibility for, my own actions, but also that there are components to trans healthcare that are irresponsible, that have to do with I guess how non-restrictive the access is to hormones and things like that. I don't know what specific, I don't know, don't ask me what specific guidelines to like put on the process, because it's really difficult to know if somebody is I don't know. I just think we need to change the entire conversation surrounding this, and we should not like, it should not be said in any like, that the alternative for transitioning, if you feel any type of like vague sense of discomfort with your gender, if you don't transition, you just like, you're going to be miserable, you're going to be an empty shell of a person, you'll kill yourself, all of that. I think we need to have a better definition of gender dysphoria that, is not so incredibly debated. I think we need to take that question more seriously, so that we can more effectively help trans people. And
people,
I guess,
period, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that reminds me, we should go back. What you've mentioned a few things that led you to initial transition, but can you say more things about it? Because like on a day-to-day basis, I want to feel this as much as possible. So
like when I was like really questioning whether or not I should transition, like when
what sorts of things would happen that would, if that's the right question.
I'm trying to go back and remember now, because that was a long time ago now. Like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, because often what I hear
well,
is
I became a lot more cognizant of like the way that people would like act towards me, because I was developing, sort of a newly, even more binary way of seeing, men and women. Because I constantly was like, which one am I? Which one am I more comfortable with? And so I guess I was becoming hyper aware of, every time someone would like refer to me in any like feminine language. So, it had to do a lot with like how people would perceive me.
So
I was very self-involved.
right, which will come up in my questions here. What I'm wondering is, so that's after, you would say, already taking in a fair bit of thinking on the subject online.
Yeah.
So do you think that made your thinking more black and white?
Yeah, I think it did. And it wasn't just online. I had a lot of trans friends at that time too. Like just
Where do
in
people find all these trans friends? People talk about having
high
trans,
school.
but the percentages, I thought, were pretty low in the population, even now.
I mean,
I guess, well, if it
it's
wouldn't take,
different at gender non-conforming people, I guess we'll say. I had a lot of gender non-conforming friends
but
who,
who thought something of it, right? Because someone can just, I wore a tutu on
yeah,
my
who
head.
were
I
like, oh,
didn't
I'm
think I
I'm
was gender.
non-binary, and like we're talking about this kind of thing.
Right.
Uh yeah.
Okay. Um, right. So so that made you think in more binary terms. But what about before then? What were some things you say that you would say you wanted to be a boy, and that you liked it when people saw you as being
At that time I didn't know what to make of that. It was just something that I had noticed, but I didn't really know what implications to make from that.
and how did if you brought it up with your parents or family or anyone, what happened? I'm assuming you did, because that's from what you've said.
Yeah. Early on, they were just kind of like confused by it, like didn't really know what to say. And I won't say that like they were dismissive, because that makes it sound like it like bad, but like they didn't know what to make of it. And I guess I sort of like felt dismissed by their, response of just kind of like, okay. And then when I started talking about, actually seriously transitioning, their concern, grew. And then when I went on testosterone, it was like, yeah, they were like peak concerned. They were like, you please don't do this. This is really bad. This is not the right decision. Like, I don't know, like the decision you're making, like, I don't think you're comprehending how huge this decision is. So that's kind of how those conversations went usually. It was rough.
Yeah, it's one of the things which probably is being polarized. It certainly looks like it, or I don't know if polarized even is the right word to use. There's such a one-sided, well, that's not polarized, one-sided way of looking at things, at least on the internet, it seems. If you look at, well, you shouldn't look at Twitter, but if I do, where it's as if either this is across the board, has to do with people responding and trying to understand and help someone who's going through something like this, is that either you're completely supportive and just whatever they think is great, or you completely say, no, you're making a mistake. And as opposed to, I would take, and this goes along with, I swear this will make sense in a minute. It goes along with whether you refer to it, some people could refer to the surgery as mutilation, and then other people take issue with referring to it as mutilation. And I would say, you could compare it. I'm sure people have made the argument. Do you think having other important, possibly life-saving surgeries are mutilation? Is if it's breast cancer, if it's whatever. And so there's that. And at the moment, the way I think of it is, all of those extreme changes are tragic and horrific, but they might be the best you can do. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, actually. I don't think it should be romanticized.
It's if someone views it as improving their life, then I can understand if they don't see it as being as horrible or don't see it
Yeah,
at all or whatever.
like
That's their business.
I'm really hesitant to, make the comparison to, breast cancer. But it, feels like, they are, very similar procedures, removal of breasts, but they're for, reasons where, the stakes seem higher in one than the other. One, it's life or death. And like, it's more objective, like this person will die if they don't get this. And one, it's like, it's not
solving psychological
that.
distress.
Yes,
maybe.
it's solving a psychological disorder.
The reason why I put it that way, though, is because what I want to do is I'm looking at it from the person's point of view, the person going through the surgery. And I'm saying, I appreciate if you view it as being potentially, they will bring up suicide and so on. So they'll say it is life-saving. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I don't want to lose the perspective in any surgery, because I'm terrified of surgery, that it is tragic and horrific. It might be for the best in the case of any of those treatments. I don't care what the treatment is. That's fine. That's your business.
Yeah.
But I just, as I say, it's my attempt to be depolarizing. We're taking a bit of each, right?
No, yes. I will acknowledge that in some cases it could be for the best.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't have a problem if you, for example, say in your case that it absolutely wasn't necessary or life-saving. That's fine. And maybe it often is, maybe it never is, but that's not what I'm interested in at this moment when I'm talking. I'm just wanted to present that way of looking at it, that I think it's useful to be able to say it's tragic and horrific to do any kind of surgery, but also say, but if someone really thinks that it's for the best for them, then okay, that's the perspective.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right, and I was saying that because I don't remember exactly what you said. You referred to surgery. I don't remember why that triggered that train of thought. I'm okay. So I'm still trying to understand what you were experiencing. So this stuff on the internet magnified it. This made it. It sounds like it organized it kind of into seeing there being a gender binary, and then you're trying to interpret your past and present discomfort in terms of, is it solved by viewing myself as being male? Is it so? What if I'm female, or see myself as being female? Something like that. But prior to that, there was still considerable discomfort. It's not like the internet invented it, right? Like I don't want to just blame the internet.
Yeah, the discomfort was just sort of like not it wasn't that much more special than like just a normal social insecurity, if I'm being honest. I mean, it felt isolating because I was like, this seems to have to do with my gender. I feel like I prefer to be read as a boy. Like it was isolating in that sense.
Is it useful to distinguish between sex and gender in the sense not only of sex being biological and gender being how you and others see yourself, but also and associated behaviors, whether they're cultural or biologically based? But were you essentially, because of your lack of physical dysphoria, would you say you were actually okay being female, but wanted to be seen as being masculine, verging on male?
Yeah, I guess that is accurate. It's not like I had any real like penis envy or anything like that. Maybe when I was like,
or the reverse, like actually having a problem with something that you did have.
Oh yeah, no. There was, I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about my genitals.
Now, I did notice that in talking to me, and I think in other videos, post-transition, pre-detransition, you referred most often to the breast tissue on my chest as opposed to my breasts.
Yeah.
Which sounds like you did not want them to be a part of you. And in fact, they ceased to be. So was that, do you think that sounds more like body dysphoria, but was that associated with thinking more about in binary terms? Do you think like there wasn't a 12-year-old problem, that was a 17-year-old problem? There's other reasons why that might not be a 12-year-old problem too, just developmentally speaking.
No, yeah, I mean, I don't know when I probably started developing breasts when I was like 11. But it's not like, it does not go with the common narrative of like, oh, as soon as I started developing breasts, I hated them and they felt like they didn't belong on me and I wanted them off. Like it wasn't like that at all.
So then is it accurate? I'm cutting you off a lot just because I forget stuff, but keep talking if you're saying something you want to say. Is it accurate to say that if there was a way at the time for you to essentially live as male while being fully female and not like be interpreted in a masculine way, referred to in that way, seen, but in a the social side was very male masculine gender, but the biological side was fully acknowledged as female? Would that have been accepted?
So you're saying if there was a reality where like I passed as male perfectly fine without needing to change my, secondary sex characteristics.
Or even more radically, if you were in a culture where there was the idea that you could have these mixed categories where you're a woman who's treated as, or a girl is treated as though she in the same ways, whatever that means. It's just so not understood to be male, but treated in terms of jokes, in terms of whatever social associations you have, the way people talk, whether they call you buddy more than something else, or whatever it is. Would that have been sufficient? Is that what you actually wanted?
I feel like that is probably what I wanted. Yeah, it's just like it's unclear like
it's a
there's
mess
actually anything meaningful that you can do about that,
and you think, if I know it could be an impossible question in terms of trying to simulate it now, but if that had just been offered to you somehow, like I don't know, even if it was just a particular group of people, or I don't know, the Church of Androgyny or something,
yeah.
would you think at the time would that have seemed appealing, or
yeah,
okay,
totally.
Now I did try to pitch something like that to you, I think in Google Messages back in the day, where I was saying if there was this hippie commune where gender wasn't such a significant thing, would that be a solution? At the time you said no.
No, I should have just started a cult.
Yeah.
I should have just been like, I should just start a cult. It's society that needs to change. No, but in all seriousness, that is probably, I think, what I wanted, but that was just, even more of that was even more of a fantasy than, the other solution, which is like, okay, change my body.
It makes me wonder whether there could be maybe there is, for all I know, a form of, I don't know if it would even be therapy. It's kind of just a club where would be particularly useful for people who are going through this and trying to figure out what to do about it early on, that they could go there and it would specifically be an environment, I don't know what it is, whether it's a weekend or whether it's where they try as much as possible to separate, if this is the right way to think of it, sex from gender, so that somehow, I mean, you could go off the rails really easily, but rather than trying to change society, if you could just go somewhere and be comfortable and play around with being seen in a certain way, it would almost be like for a day you say, okay, rather than insisting or trying to convince someone to see you in a particular way, it's saying, would you please for today try to see me this way? And maybe you even exaggerate the mannerisms you associate with that particular gender. I wonder if that would,
it's hard to know if that wouldn't just be,
confusing.
more harmful or more confusing. It's hard to know. It's hard. Gender is very deeply integrated into, Western culture. It's very, it's less strictly enforced than it was, 50 or 100 years ago, but it is still incredibly binary, I would say. And I don't think that you can get out of that evolutionarily.
Well, there are reasons too to exaggerate it. Like, I don't blame people or culture necessarily, even though it can have problems, for probably exaggerating it. It has its advantages to do that. Like
Yeah, it
dance
does.
has this whole thing.
I was just saying, yeah, it does. And it also has really, dire consequences as well.
Yeah, I mean, without discounting any of the criticisms that one might level at it, something I've thought of for a couple of years, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, is I've on and off, I've done square dancing. Are you familiar with square dancing at all?
Yeah.
And it's like, it really is square in every way. And one of the things that I like, it's in other dances do it too, but square dancing really does, is I felt as though one of the things we were doing was playing with, you could say gender.
Give me 1 second. Sorry.
That's fine. Right, square dancing.
Yes.
It seemed to me that it exaggerated, because it had fairly defined male and female roles, that it exaggerated them. And often the women like to wear flouncy dresses and the men don't usually. And even it felt as though it made the men more men and the women more women. And to put it somewhat crudely, like a lot of activities I find myself in, most of the people were retirement age, but it made, so it's not like the women were necessarily in my age bracket, but it made them seem more attractive because it exaggerated what to me are the sexual roles. Now, you could argue the degree to which those are culturally determined. It doesn't matter. I grew up with them. So to me, in a very dull conservative way, it made things hotter almost, but in a very civilized way. So it wasn't like it was irritatingly exciting or something. And dancing, like, they do that. They play around with exaggerating the roles. And that's something which I think is underappreciated with, it's always oppressive gender roles. Is that the term? What are the gender norms? All that is, I understand if that's the case for people, and it's not like no one fits. I don't think anyone fits them perfectly. No one is the ideal of a particular culture in general. So of course it's going to be a pain, and for some people a huge pain, but it doesn't mean that it's not actually beneficial and really enjoyable too, to play around with it for people as well.
Yeah, you can't call gender norms, the existence of gender norms, a universally good or bad thing. I think that's the problem that I have with a lot of the rhetoric surrounding this, is that, you have people who are, again, to kind of break it up in the pro-trans, anti-trans binary, which is, not nuanced enough to really talk about it. But you have people who are super, super pro-trans who say, like, gender roles are dead. And then you have people who are more anti-trans, gender critical, or turfy, if you will, who say the same thing. Gender roles are dead, or gender roles are harmful. They both believe that gender roles are harmful. But the anti-trans, I guess, we'll call them turfs, which is very just disparaging, but
yeah, I was going to ask you more about that.
It's short and simple, I'm not using it in a disparaging way or an attacking way.
You're using more to refer to the cultural phenomenon too.
Yes, yeah. You have turfs who
which stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist, by the way.
Yes.
I expect most of my viewers, well, if they come from your channel, they'll know what you're talking about.
Yeah, some of them, no one else will know. Some of them are just, call themselves radical feminists or gender critical or whatever. But the ideology is, consistent. They'll cling to biological essentialism. And on the one hand, I can see their point. There is something that is liberating about saying that, I'm not going to lose my femaleness no matter what I do, no matter how I dress, no matter how I'm seen. I will never, that nothing that I do will make me less of a female because that is my sex. But then on the pro trans side, it's the exact opposite where you cling to gender, which, you know, in a way is, I guess, more difficult because it's more difficult to define, um, which basically is like, if you have the internal identity, if you have your own sense of, if your sense of self is male, then it doesn't matter, you know, what your biology is or how you're perceived or all that, you're still that. But one just prefers biology to psychology. That, I think that's what it seems to come down to.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't, but they both see gender roles as the enemy, cultural gender roles as the enemy.
Now, do you think, okay, we're jumping around, but that's fine. I can always cut this into bits that are more logical if I want to. In fact, I'm going to have to, because I don't expect that many people to watch 3 hours of us talking. Maybe they will. Do you have any idea whether your viewers would watch 3 hours in one go?
3 hours? Probably not. And I mean, I don't watch a lot of 3 hour talks.
I don't anymore. I used to.
One of the ones that I did watch was Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan. I listened to that, I think, all in one go, but yeah, probably not, but that's okay.
Yeah. I've lost it again. Well, okay, we talked about the gender stuff. Anyway, we'll come back to that. I'm wondering if there's anything else I should ask about the general dysphoria, it's just, or whatever you want. I just call it dysphoria because to me it's psychological and medical enough. Like, it's accurate as a word, you know, meaning unhappy, basically. So you think that the taking in other thinking and talking about it online magnified a lot?
Yeah.
But it sounds like it also did it intensify the feelings, or also just give you a way of thinking about already intense discomfort?
Yes, the validation of my discomfort sort of magnified it.
So it did magnify. Right. So I guess chronologically, I started derailing things when you were saying that you so if you didn't see whether something fit, I forget exactly what you said, but that you start to categorize things. Does that make me more, or feel more masculine or more feminine? So were there specific things that you felt were more masculine that appealed to you? Or conversely, feminine things that you didn't like as they pertain to you?
Well, I think one of the positive things that came with me transitioning was that I gained a lot of social confidence. And
why?
I was always like a very like kind of quiet and timid person, and I would rather have been a quiet sort of cerebral guy than like the, you know, submissive girl who like doesn't ever have anything to say. I was also very insecure about my intelligence and thought that I was worried that I was like really dumb. I really wanted to be like not seen as a dumb girl. I don't think I'm dumb anymore, but I did like around this time. And I was like, I do not want to be seen as like a dumb like girl, like airhead girl. I'd rather be like, I'd rather inhabit these traits that I already have as a guy, I think would be an accurate way to put it.
Okay, I think you got to say more about that. There's got some implications in there. So, yeah. and this gets fully into, you know, how people or society, I hesitate to talk about anything so broad, how you might think it views male, female,
yes,
masculine, feminine. I'm interested at the moment, and at the time, how you think you felt about it. Like, I do wonder, like, I don't want to jump to it, but I do wonder, there is the theory that it is that it may be unappealing. Maybe women do have it worse, or maybe in certain ways that I'd say undoubtedly certain people have certain things worse, but or at least it's perceived that way, or whatever. So, but at the time, whatever time this exactly is, 12 to 17 or so.
Yeah. One trope that I've noticed, I guess in terms of the intelligence trait, is that intelligence in females, or like the trait of stupidness in females, is also kind of closely associated to like hyperfemininity, right? Like I think of the movie Legally Blonde, right?
I actually haven't watched it, but the name is kind of implies a few things.
Yeah, so it's basically this girl who, is kind of like a bimbo. I hate that word, but like I'll use it. She's that trope. She's like, super feminine and like Barbie, and like she's a total airhead. And it's funny because she somehow gets accepted into Harvard Law School.
Okay.
Right. So it's just, one example of the trope where female stupidity is also directly linked to hyperfemininity. And I think that like it's kind of there with guys, but it's not quite.
Certainly,
So
there's the idea of
like a dumb Chad
a
bro,
dumb macho,
like
yeah,
who just goes
yeah.
to the gym, and like that's all he knows how to do is lift
Yeah,
weights.
I'd actually never seen it as a parallel, but now that I think of it, I would actually assume, the internet can judge me for this, the more muscular a guy was, the less cerebral. But you'd have to convince me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I feel like it is
And the
less.
same thing with attractiveness in women. The more attractive, generally, unless they do it in a way that looks smart, add a lot of glasses, I would probably think the less likely that they are a thinker too. So that goes both ways, right? If you look more nerdy, that tends to mean less attractive.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you had a point that I've derailed because I don't know that they are entirely equal, but there definitely are some parallels.
Yeah. So I think I just decided, like, well, I don't even know if I consciously decided this or if I even articulated this to myself, back when I was between the ages of 12 and 17. But I think that's what it was, is that I would rather be seen, if I'm going to be seen as dumb by anyone, I would rather be seen as a dumb guy than as a dumb girl. I don't know. I don't know if that's even accurate. But it seems right.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I can. I'm trying to feel that. Of course, I'm quite out of the loop too, as you say, having grown up, outside of school primarily, and then associating a lot with people generally older than me a lot. That's part of why I think I come at all this stuff interested, is because I just have no clue what's going on. I do wonder how much. Okay, again, this is kind of a side note. How much do you think? There's the sense I get with a lot of, if this is obnoxious to anyone, it's just because I can't say it very precisely, so I'm just throwing stuff together, but a lot of social activism, where I wonder if they view all of society as being like high school, and it's not. Because I've been, I believe, somewhat weird and perceived as weird my whole life in terms of dealing with the broader world. And there have been a number of times where I was with people, like, for example, in a construction work class, where you would not expect, it was bricklaying, you would not expect them necessarily to be particularly kind, and they were definitely going out of their way to include me in things, even if it meant making fun of something. It was still a form of it was done nicely as a form of inclusion. When I had longer hair at work, people sometimes made jokes about that. And that's the opposite of what the social activism seems to be afraid of. That all jokes that are sort of at someone's expense or really at their expense. It's inclusion rather than exclusion. It can easily be. I even wonder if it's for whatever reason, more masculine approach is to include through making fun, whereas perhaps, and again,
no, females don't really do that. I think, I mean, I guess males want to be inclusive with each other and
Mhm.
females want to be inclusive with each other. They just have different ways of doing it, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, and I do wonder whether the current social activism way is more concerned with, it certainly looks like this to me, but it seems like it's a more typically feminine approach. It's
Feminist approach. Yeah, no, I mean,
and fine, like it's got a point, but so this goes back to I'm wondering whether there's a mistake too, and I'm relating this to you back when you're between 12 and 17, whether high school heightens some of this stuff and the broader world does not so much. It's not as harsh, it's not as gendered. Um,
that seems to be right. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say whether or not it's, my surroundings or, external things that became less harsh and less gendered, or if I just, it was more of a mental thing. But, in a sense, and this also is, risky and could sound really bad, but in a sense, it
that
seems
gives me an
like,
idea. We should be attentive when someone says something that could be risky and bad, then the other person can just offer an opposing view or
yeah,
something to balance it
yeah,
out.
for sure. In a way, it feels like I grew out of being trans,
Mm-hmm.
because for me, being trans was sort of a social thing, sort of something that like really relied on like what social group you belonged to, where you were in society. Um, and in a public high school environment, yes, that is definitely heightened. People like people are more judgmental in high school. People will treat you differently because of the way you look in high school. It's more clear than, when you even when you go to college, it's like way less like that. And yeah, it is less like that in the real world because everyone's too concerned with themselves than, other people or how they look to other people.
Well, they're also polite generally.
Right, exactly.
Uh, are people less polite in high school?
Um, I mean, it's not as bad as like, the like I didn't have like there weren't like bullies in my high school. I feel like high school bullies, at least in the way that they're like portrayed through media, I'm not sure that they actually exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I wonder.
yeah, it's more of a subtle thing. You just kind of find yourself to be a social outcast and like, oh, I guess nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to be friends with me. I feel like people avoid me. Um, it's more of a subtle thing.
That
It's not
must
necessarily,
snowball really quickly.
yeah, yeah,
I can imagine it's a positive reinforcement loop, whichever way you go. If you start to rightly or wrongly think that nobody likes you, it's going to be pretty hard probably to start decent relationships. And if
Mhm.
you think, oh, this is going pretty well, everybody likes me, then you're more likely to, I would hope, unless you just act like a jerk, to act more in a way that is more engaging and expressive. So that probably,
Yeah, yeah, there are
that's,
people,
as an outsider, that's a new idea to me. Maybe it's
yeah, there are
obvious
people
to me.
who, might, not actually be liked by people who think that they are liked by people, and they typically tend to be a lot more comfortable with themselves.
Mhm.
Um, and I always envied that.
Going back to I don't remember whether we addressed it completely or not, to being more confident when you transitioned. That's because of your association with you'd prefer to be a dumb guy than a dumb girl, or is it?
Well, that was just, I mean, that's, I think, one piece of it. But I just, I felt more like I don't know. I don't know how to say why I felt more confident as a guy. I just did. I think I came off as more like, I was able to come off as more self-assured and, um, I no longer had to worry about like men bothering me. Part of it was that,
Had
'cause
that
people,
happened before? Like, I have no idea how common it is.
oh yeah, I mean, it had happened a few occasions before, like before I transitioned. So, that was an element of it. There was a sort of like, uh, just the fact that like I am less like, if I am perceived as a man by other men, they're not going to come up to me and like harass me or bother me. Um,
I had
so
heard it was, sorry, I did it again. What were you going to say?
so that
Uh,
enabled me to like, walk alone
right.
at night and not worry about that. So that was another piece of it. Um,
Because I've heard that it's, I think, an actual psychological theory, not just by armchair psychologists, but real ones, that childhood abuse or trauma can cause, at least among girls, them to want to be male because they see it
that
as being
makes
stronger. I heard of one particular account that I was
that
paying
makes
attention
perfect sense to me. Yeah, that makes perfect
to.
sense.
And that I thought was interesting. That's both practical as well as psychological, I would say.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I'm also wondering is, I had heard that taking testosterone makes you more confident, and that taking testosterone can actually make girls feel like this is working.
Yes, there are really especially in the first like 1 to 2 months of being on if being on testosterone as a female is your literal thought processes change. I mean
Now,
it
whatever you're willing to tell me, I'd love to hear.
um I literally went through a male puberty.
Mhm.
I literally put my body through what a adolescent boy would go through. So you know, I was unable to like cry for like 3 years. All of my negative emotions basically manifested as like anger.
It's so stereotypical and funny.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I was just like more relaxed. I mean, I was still anxious. I was still like an anxious person, but I think I came off as, and I felt more like relaxed and just comfortable in my own skin.
You think
Um,
your posture changed, or the way you moved your body?
yeah, it did. I think it did. Um, some of that was intentional, but I think a lot of it actually wasn't. It's hard to say.
I would think it would be very hard to tell, because it would very naturally come as trying to sort of, I don't want to cheapen it, but as moving into a role, like just
Oh yeah.
subconsciously
And since
to
I've
them.
detransitioned, like those kind of things have changed too. Like my speech pattern has changed.
Mhm.
Mhm.
One
Um,
thing I noticed with your videos was that, okay, I mentioned before when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, that my bias, I think that's a good way to think of it, for right and wrong, is very natural. So any modification, whether it's decorative earrings, um, tattoos, male, female, makeup, whatever, I, oh, really? Um, so this is the hippie homeschooled part of me. And the reason I bring that up, what was the reason I brought that up? Oh, yeah. But so the point is that I'm not one to rush and be delighted that someone is transitioning. I hope it's good for them, but my natural thing is with modification. How's that? But watching your before and after videos, pre-transition and post, you seemed very different, and you seemed more comfortable. Like, you seemed very tentative before. It actually bothered me.
Tentative,
Well,
like at what point?
you talked slower. So this would be, we were talking about gender. There's one you've still got up there where you're talking about, I forget what it's called, whether it's questioning your gender, whether, I think it was actually your coming out video, probably, but it's still pre-transition. And it's very thoughtful, but it does not sound as confident. It sounds,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And there are a bunch that are no longer available to the public that I had the good fortune to watch in order to be thoroughly confused. And yeah, you seemed more timid, I would say.
Yeah, more like I was just like apologizing for my existence. Like I don't
And yet
know
you're on YouTube.
how I
Like,
identify. I don't know though. And then,
um,
1 year on T, I'm like, hey, yeah, no, it was, yeah, I think you're right about that. I think, also a part of that was probably a performance. Um,
and you've kept a lot of it. Like, I would say, I see, obviously you're a lot older now. I see more of you from 4 years ago than I see you from 6 years ago or whatever it was.
I think a lot of it just has to do with like maturing, honestly.
Mhm.
Like not even with gender, but just like I think as you get older, you tend to get more comfortable in yourself, even if you never get to like, peak macho Chad confidence, like I think I'm probably always gonna have my little insecurities, but like I definitely think I'm more self-assured. And I don't think that has to do with gender. And I think we should try to disassociate that with gender, because clearly that really bamboozled me. I was like, oh, if I want to be more comfortable in myself, guys tend to be more confident in themselves. Women are kind of encouraged to be
Mhm.
timid. So I should just become a guy. It's like, no, like,
Yeah. I don't know what to do about that because I don't think I'm too, how do I want to phrase it? I don't think I would particularly be attracted to the most stereotypically female and feminine women, but I'm
yeah,
sure I appreciate some of it. So I don't want to completely, I'm not going to rush to eliminate that as being associated with femininity. I don't know what to
yeah.
do about that because I really do have a
I
sense of what
think
it's like
I
on the,
think the difference is that it seems to be a lot more discouraged in men for men to be that way than it is for girls to be that way. Like I feel like the idea of a timid man is more like socially frowned upon than
could
the
that
idea. I
continue?
think it's an
I'm just
evolutionary thing.
excited. Yes. Mm. And I was going to could that, but that has some functional basis, doesn't it? Again, it could
Um,
be exaggerated, but
it can have a functional basis, but it can also, as I mentioned before,
yeah,
have very,
yeah.
damaging
So what to
consequences.
do about that? That's the thing.
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
I all I can think of is it's a matter of being attentive to each kid as they grow up. I don't know if it's changing the culture. It's having I'd like to have a diverse range of options. So it would be nice to have movies and books and so on that genuinely have characters of different sorts. Not to
Mhm.
be fair, but because someone was inspired to make that character.
Yeah.
And then you've got and so that it's there so that even if so that you, if someone is unusually one way or the other, there is something out there at least. And then if the people around them aren't too strict, but at the same time there still could be some norm, maybe. That's not me trying
Yeah.
to make a utopia, that's me guessing.
Right. Yeah. I do listen to, I don't know why I do. I'm not a conservative. I'm not right wing. I'm also not left wing, really. But um, I watch, I'll sometimes watch like a Michael Knowles video or like a Matt Walsh video just because I don't know, I find something interesting
Mhm.
about like that sort of like culturally conservative, like boys don't belong in dresses. If you put your son in a dress, you are abusing him. Like you're being an abusive parent. We need to have these strict gender roles. And I'm like, I don't I don't understand it. Like I don't think that um I can feel myself becoming less articulate as this conversation gets longer and longer. Um, but that's kind of what you're referring to, right?
um I didn't think so. I mean I'm just oh, I can say what I said again. I'm thinking that perhaps what I wouldn't want to completely destroy. Well, no, I don't want to. I wouldn't want to. This isn't because I don't want to on this channel even act as though I'm suggesting what people should do or what society should be. But I do
Mhm.
think it's a useful. I'm going to talk almost as if I am because I like the underlying ideas. Um, that I think it is useful and enjoyable to have a range of options for lack of a better term, gender expression, gender relations in videos and media and whatever.
Yes.
From the
And there
point of
should,
view of I don't want it to be there though because someone put it there just so that people could see it. I want them to be inspired to, I want to make a character like this.
Yes.
I want to make a
And
story
there
about
shouldn't be
this.
any implications placed on, the child that like, oh, because you relate to this character or whatever, that's what this says about you as a person.
Yeah. And no, I don't know. I don't know in the immediate social environment of a kid I don't know how you balance out giving them the structure and the idea of there being norms, because I think you need to have norms. This is something that I'm trying to understand. Part of raising kids early on is a lot like indoctrination. Like, you are telling them this is the way, even if you know that there are other ways, because this is the best thing you can give them at that time
Yes.
for their
And that
age.
involves telling them what a male is and what a female is.
I think it does. And I
Yes.
don't know how to do that well, other than pay a lot of attention and help them experiment while giving the constraints. But I haven't known of kids, I don't know. And I would seems to me it would be nice to both have room for the more progressive, radical, whatever expressions people want to do and have it in movies, but also to not throw out what seems like the old-fashioned ones.
Mhm.
I don't think you automatically stamp out.
Well, what do you mean by the old-fashioned ones?
I like watching action movies with macho characters. It's
Yeah.
soothing. But I don't know if it's compensation for something or what. But at the same time, I like things with quirky characters, with different ones, with that are refreshingly different. But I wouldn't want to say, oh, that's just some stereotypical garbage. I don't think it is. I think it's got its own place.
It does, yeah. And, exposing that to a child isn't damaging in and of itself. Now, it could be if you're like, see that character, that super macho character, that's who you need to grow up to be, son, to be a valuable member of society. Don't be, passive. It's like when you start doing that, when you start making implications about like how your child should be, that's when I guess it's damaging. But like I said, I'm not like, I don't have kids. I don't really like, I don't know anything about like child development psychology, really. I know very little about it, but.
Yeah, I even wonder though there, I mean, I certainly agree with the sentiment of not directing kids, but I think you probably have to, especially if, just from the point of view of motivation, like it's useful to have the idea of for me personally right now, I find it useful to admire traditionally masculine characteristics. No, okay, no, I have to stop myself.
I feel like
Is it also useful for me to admire feminine characteristics?
masculine characteristics are just like the most socially praised, even in women, like I think the sort of like one of the things I find sort of annoying about third wave feminism and I guess neoliberal feminism is the idea that like, when a woman is very like female superheroes, when like the trope of like the really badass strong woman, like those are still masculine characteristics. And the question then is that is it more useful to have or is it more inclusive to acknowledge that feminine characteristics like being caring, being more attentive to relationships, being more, I guess, sensitive, that those should just be like equally as praised and encouraged in women as like strength and bravery and protectiveness and determination and ambition, like that those cultural distinctions are actually useful and that they should both be like encouraged. Well, I don't know. I do you get what I'm saying though?
Yeah, well, I feel like you want to encourage them, but I don't know whether there's some advantage to sort of directing kids in a particular direction initially and then letting them go the wrong way. I don't know. And then talking about it to the internet is in a sense the last thing I want to do. But the reason why I am is just because I wanted to make some attempt, or have us make some attempt at presenting a subtler version. I think that there's merits to both, probably, to both encouraging a particular sexualized route and then also just encouraging people to choose what fits them.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, if you encourage passivity too much in women and encourage, dominance too much in men, then you're going to get, more
Yeah,
cases of abuse and rape, right?
I don't know that passivity is useful on its own. I have to think about that. Like being receptive is different from passive.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I barely know what I'm talking about. But I do think it's interesting that I would be interested in hearing people who know more than I do, comparing, just looking at it not as one or the other. Like either we try to abolish all norms and encourage everyone to be whatever from age 0, and another one which is you channel them from the very beginning. I suspect there's interesting things to be gained from going somewhere between those.